Today we're going to be talking about Anora. You may have heard of it. This is one of the most popular films of this of the Oscar season, of the awards season. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and has been sort of like this, kind of like this. And I don't want to say underdog, but story, but a smaller movie from like a known filmmaker, but that has like blown up in popularity and is now sort of built this momentum as like an awards favorite, possibly an Academy Award winning movie in multiple categories.
Sean Baker was absolutely once upon a time an underdog. I don't know if we could any longer say that.
I think this movie has definitely anointed him as like, part of
Florida Project. I feel like he was on his way.
Florida Project was on his way for sure, but like, his last movie, Red Rocket,
This is the most mainstream.
Yes,
I would say.
This has become his most mainstream movie for sure. And we weren't actually planning on covering this, and then Rivka and I were casually chatting about it, and it turns out I love this movie, and Rivka hated this movie.
My feelings may have changed from hated. Hated was the first. I've unpacked, we'll talk about it. I've unpacked what that means since. I've watched it more than once, so.
I watched it again for the sake of this podcast because we are committed to the craft of podcasting. But let's dive right in. Today we are talking about the film Anora, written and directed by Sean Baker, starring Mikey Madison, Mark Edelstein, Yora Borisov, Karen Karagulian, and Vache Tovmasian. The budget for this movie was $6 million, and so far it has made $33.5 million worldwide. If you have not seen this movie, go see this movie. This is definitely a worthwhile film to watch. We will be spoiling in this conversation. But this is the story of Anora, aka Annie, a 23-year-old stripper and sex worker who meets a ludicrously wealthy fuckboy named Vanya, who whisks Annie away for a Pretty Woman-esque be my girlfriend for a week type of deal that leads to the two of them getting married in Las Vegas. But little does Annie know that Vanya's parents are Russian oligarchs who send the family's goons after Vanya and Annie to annul the marriage.
Mm-hmm. Released just recently on November 8th, 2024. We entered into the new year as Israel continued its genocide in Gaza, resulting in a growing Free Palestine movement in the U.S. and around the world. Donald Trump was almost assassinated. Joe Biden stepped down as Democratic nominee for president, and Kamala Harris stepped in, then spent the campaign paying hollow lip service to her base and campaigning with Liz Cheney, resulting in Trump's re-election as president. And in November, Luigi Mangione allegedly assassinated Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, in a politically motivated killing that set off a public debate over the murderous U.S. health insurance industry.
Yeah, I lifted this historical context from our Alien Romulus episode, which we only recorded a few months ago, and I was like, oh my god, so much has fucking happened since then. Jesus Christ.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Riv and I have, I think, some differing opinions about this film, but since this is a movie about a female protagonist, Rivka, I will cede the floor for you to begin.
Yeah, well, I'll start with, I think this is also a lesson in, like, so much. Well, I guess I've been thinking about it a lot just in terms of, like, the responsibility of an audience and your responsibility as a viewer as to, like, how you take in content, which I do think that there's, like, a responsibility. And I think it totally transforms how one views something. And also just, like, I guess that in the context of just, I saw, maybe it was, like, a tweet or a meme, but just about how, like, now going to the cinemas, like going to a concert, like, just at the level of, like, event that it's so, like, so fewer and fewer people are just going to the cinemas. And we've talked about before.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, just like the
like
role
the
of
cost
that.
of a concert.
Yeah, this is my long-winded way of saying I didn't see it in the cinema. Partially because it just didn't work out for me. So I think I may have appreciated on first watch parts more. I think it is a very cinematic movie. And then also by the time it got to me, damn it, it was so fucking hyped.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean, I mean, there's so little you can, some movies make it some movies you're like, yeah, I get it. For me, this one, it hit me and I was like, fuck, dude, what? This is not what I was hyped for. Also, I'll say, I think I probably I loved Tangerine, which I haven't rewatched in a long time. And it might also be like a lot about it might say a lot about just like my trajectory of taste and also like how politics have shaped, the kind of films that I like as well. But I remember loving the fuck out of Tangerine. Did you see Tangerine?
Yes, but I haven't seen it since it first came out. I also remember really enjoying it a lot.
Also about sex workers, trans sex workers. Super, like, was Sean Baker's big, for anyone who hasn't seen it, like, kind of breakout in the indie scene.
2015. So,
yeah.
10 years ago, yeah.
10 years ago. Wild. Shot on an iPhone, like, very low budget. Before that, I know he had a 2004 film, Takeout.
Never seen Takeout.
I saw it a long time ago. I remember really liking it, but it'd be interesting. All of these have interesting politics to cover. I'm curious how I would think about it now. I know, like, we can get into all the things that Sean Baker may or may not been, like, accused of in terms of class. And not Frank's face was like, no. I was like, no.
I was like, no. Everyone.
No, just in terms of, like, as a filmmaker and particularly class, being someone whose origin, not that you can only make films about your own class, obviously, but I know there's been, like, kind of a legacy, like, people critiquing him of, what is the word they use? Like, poverty porn? I don't know if that's what they say, but, like, yeah, which I don't know if that would be how I felt, but I would have to go back to that earlier work.
Do we know if Sean Baker comes from?
He comes from, like, Jersey, I think, like, middle-class Jersey.
Okay, hell yeah.
But definitely has a desire, as he stated, to, like, I'd say he started in, certainly, like, he would be considered, I think, cinema verite, like, definitely aims to have more of a documentary feel and also aims to put characters on screen. Definitely most of his characters are working class, lower class. And he, like, aims to take characters that have previously been stigmatized in cinema and society and destigmatize them. I think that's, like, one of his goals as stated as a filmmaker, which
I personally really appreciate.
Yeah. Can't argue that that's not clearly what his filmmaking career has been about. This one, this was my experience. Was like, yeah, not seeing in theater, being overhyped. I just felt, I think of all his films, it was the most mainstream. It was in some ways for me the least cinema verite.
It was very pop. It's very pop.
And I think in the context of feeling over euphoria-fized, coining it.
Yep.
That was like, that was just a part of it for me. I felt like there was a euphoria-esque tone quality, particularly to the first part of the movie, but that lingered, which I appreciated when I was like, oh, is this going to get turned on its head? And I think it does. But I think what it comes down to for me was it leaned mainstream, geared further away from the cinema verite, and didn't have enough of a directorial point of view for me that felt like it made it slam dunk there. Like, I almost wanted more of the earlier, and this is not political, this is not politics, this is just my taste. That kind of disappointed me. And then I think we got to the end, and we can talk about the ending scene, but I think I was just, like, super let down by Annie's arc. And that last scene left me feeling just like my first reaction was just like, oh, really? Fuck.
Sure.
I just felt like it was, like, a very, like, predictable male gaze. Like, it just was not, I was like, and maybe we're going to get something that I wasn't going to see happening that's, like, really going to blow my mind, that's going to give her, like, true agency and not, like, the male gaze version of agency where it's, like, see through, and we'll talk more specifically about it, but like,
The ending specifically is very, I feel, intentionally provocative.
Yeah, and he says intentionally ambiguous, which I'm down with, but I actually didn't feel like I didn't feel like there was anything ambiguous about it. So, and I haven't found anyone who's had a take that felt so differing from, like, what I saw. I think it's just everyone kind of saw the same story and has different opinions on that story.
Sure.
But I felt like the story was ultimately, like, Igor gave her this agency by saying, I would like you to kiss me and like give me this moment of intimacy, and it broke her down. And we can talk about like what that means, but I think everyone was pretty agreed upon on the beats. Like I didn't feel that I was looking for the take that was like, this is what it means. And everyone, I think, I didn't feel like it was where Sean was like, I didn't feel it was so ambiguous, and I would be actually more down for that level of ambiguity. So that was my initial reaction, was like, ugh, fuck me. This, like, fuck you. I wanted you to do better. And then on a rewatch, there's so much in here to talk about that I'm excited to talk about. And I wouldn't say I hate this movie. I would say I was disappointed. It's probably like a 7 out of, like, you know, which is still pretty high, but I was wanting like a 10 out of 10.
Sure,
you know?
Sure. Yeah, especially with all of the hype. That's totally
And
fair.
my personal hype too, you know, just of being like, which I have to investigate. But it was more like a 7 out of 10. Like, there were far better films this year for me.
Totally. I had kind of the opposite experience. I don't have like a personally strong attachment to Sean Baker and his work. I've seen Tangerine. I've seen The Florida Project, both of which I really liked.
Did you see Red Rocket?
I did not see Red Rocket.
Fascinating, and probably has a lot of things we could discuss. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested to watch Red Rocket now. But like, I've really enjoyed his movies. I've never been like, oh, that's one of my favorite up and coming filmmakers. But I'd heard so much about Anora. I knew that it had won the Palme d'Or, and I was starting to hear the chatter.
First American movie in a while.
I think so. Yeah.
We need we need to win somewhere.
Yeah, and I'd been hearing that it was very, very good. So when it opened in New York, it was like had a very limited run, like at the end of the summer before it was actually going to open wide. And I was like, let me go see this movie while I got the shot. And I thought it was, and maybe it was the cinematic experience in the theater, packed house. You know, before we'd really known much about the story itself. Yeah, I was just really enraptured by the filmmaking. Mikey Madison is unbelievable in this movie. She does so much. She is so compelling and endearing, and there's like it's a really incredible trick, or not trick, but like it's just the magic of movies where, I don't know, 5-10 minutes into the movie you're like, I care about this girl so much. I really hope she's okay. Like, I hope that she's going to be good. They just find a way right off the bat to just like ingratiate you with her and where she's at in her life and what she's doing.
And that's so much to her credit. Yeah. Did you know her before as an actor?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've been a big fan of hers.
I think she's always, Better Things. She's amazing.
Better Things. Yeah. Better Things was my first introduction to her. Better Things is one of the best TV shows of the last 5-10 years. And she's been in like, she was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She was in one of the Scream movies recently. So she's like always popping up and doing really good work. So yeah, so I was pumped to see it, and I was surprised. It's a surprising movie in where it goes, and the turns that it takes, and the way that the plot unfolds. A lot of it you don't see coming. A lot of it is very strikes these very strange tones where it's like very dangerous and scary, but also kind of like slapstick comedy simultaneously. And that's not something I feel like I see very often. And I mean, we can debate whether or not that is a dangerous tone to strike in some of these scenes as an audience member. And ultimately, I thought it was a tragic story at the end. A tragic story about how the American dream is not real. And there is no rags to riches story. Like, that doesn't exist. And how we are conditioned to believe that either you can work hard enough or you can hit the lotto in a given sense and just sort of leap classes in a way. But how that in reality and in practice is nearly impossible, if not completely.
Yeah, agree with all of that. Except I would say I didn't feel that I didn't see any of it coming. Like, I didn't feel that the plot, it wasn't like there was nothing in the plot itself that I was like, wow, never saw this movie before.
No, I knew where it was going. Like, you know where it's going, but I just mean like specifically how it unfolds. And you don't expect to also I mean, at least this is my experience, you don't expect to also, by the, last third of the movie, be also caring about, the goons that have been sent after her and Ivan, like these trio of men who are also workers, who are
which
also...
is the strongest part of this film for sure. And that is the part that I felt like the mainstream pulled away from a bit, that I appreciate Baker's movies usually for, is like such a good eye on the quote unquote supporting characters always kind of become the fascination of the film.
Yeah.
And the awareness of like the working class and their roles and how they're all intrinsically tied up. I don't think there's a single character in this movie who's working, whose job doesn't get in danger or isn't fucked up by this old chase of this fucking oligarch child, which is great. Down to from like everything from, and that's not missed, like everything from the guy who has to tow the car and it's like, it's my fucking job, I'm gonna get fired, like what, to the hostess at Tatiana's who's like, no, I can't, you're gonna be fired. Like, I think that was like one of the strongest pieces of this for sure. There's like a lot, there's so much in here because he does touch on, and it's also a long movie.
I did read, and doing a little bit of research, that the American dream in America was very much at the forefront of his mind in writing and crafting this movie. And something that I didn't pick up on until I read it in like an interview is that the color palette of this movie is red, white, and blue. Like so many different shots of like, his red bed sheets, her blue dress with the white wall. So, and that runs throughout the movie. So like that idea is like very much at the forefront of like, this is the land of opportunity. Anything can happen. You can become a billionaire's wife overnight if you're just in the right place and you, I don't know, shake your ass well enough.
Mm-hmm. Do business well enough. If you do, but yeah.
Or yeah, you do business well enough. Well, let's start there because that's sort of as where we start. And I think Baker is able to ingratiate you to Annie so quickly. The first thing we see, other than the first opening tracking shot, like in, the slow motion dance, is we see her in the club, just like hustling for her money. She is working, and it's not just the stripping. It's not just the the overt flashy part of sex work. It's her on the floor, trying to make conversation, trying to convince guys to go to the ATM, talking to these
hustling, and then also in a way like hustling, but also feels like, what I appreciate, it kind of feels like working at, a restaurant, a bar. It wasn't like she's not like, it's like,
I mean, hustling in the way of like hustle culture, grind set, hustling. Yeah. But that's a really good point. It does feel like working at a restaurant or working at a bar. Like, you guys good over here? You need anything? You guys good over here? You need anything?
Yeah. Like, I appreciated that for like, there's, and I guess that goes along the lines of where I do understand people are like, I love that this makes an attempt to destigmatize sex work, whether it does that successfully or not. I haven't settled on, but I think part of the way it does that is just, there's good moments, there's bad moments. It's like the work itself is not what inherently makes it toxic. It's actually the fucking capitalism that makes it toxic, like any other fucking job. Like, she laughs at, you know what I mean? You're like, hard job. Dancing like that, not fucking easy. Like an artist's work, to be fucking honest. Like, skill set. And a working class job because, which I'm sure you'll get to, is like they have the point of making like, I don't get a 401k. Like, I'm a fucking gig worker. I'm commodified. My body is what I sell, but so does a lot of other people.
Love that line when she's trying to get off for the week. And she tells her boss, once you give me health insurance, workers' comp, and a 401k, then you can tell me when I work and when I don't. So like that, which is great. And like, which really roots you in the material conditions and struggle of this character. And then juxtapose the club, which is just like so neon and colorful, smash cut to her like on the subway in a hoodie.
I loved that shot.
Taking the train back at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. whenever she's getting out of the club, walking home. Her roommate asking her if she picked up milk.
Her sister, right?
Her sister, that's right. They set Annie up as just like a very genuine person who is doing her best in this field, in the world of sex work that she is in, and just from watching this, it's amazing. Just from watching this person like work her job as well as she can. I think most audience members see that and are like, I get it. I've obviously never done sex work, but like I've had to fucking do a catering job that I leave at, 6 a.m. in the morning and then drive back an hour to my apartment or whatever. And I think that does a lot of lifting to get you on Annie's side pretty quickly.
Just taste-wise, like I wanted more of Annie at home and on the train, or even just in like her conversation with her friend outside. Like I personally felt like there was a euphoria, like I said, a Euphoria-esque quality to like the filming of it, which I think was intentional. I think they're trying to set up the Cinderella. Like I do think there is a little bit of trying to romanticize our intake of this world at the top, because I think the intention is to flip that at the end. I found that intention muddied. I felt like I wanted personally, just taste-wise, to go either fully there or give us more of the cinema verite. Like I didn't need to see so much of the sex, even though that's part of it. There was a glossiness to it that I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's a long sequence. But that was like, again, I recognize that's taste. I was like, I don't know if this is, I wanted more of a point of view from the filmmaker, from the director. But yes, I think Annie is totally, you're on her side. And I think, again, so much of that is just Mikey Madison.
A lot of it is Mikey Madison. I don't know. I felt like there was some pretty strong points of view coming from Sean Baker.
Conflicting. I felt like they were conflicting. I felt like I wanted it to be, and again, that just might be where I'm coming from now with like, I'm just like, I love when a filmmaker's like, I fucking thought of something and really clearly, and like you're like, damn, that was smart. I never had that moment here. I felt like a lot of it is that cinema verite thing of like, I'm putting the people here and I'm pulling, and I'm letting the camera pull the brilliance of just humans being humans.
Yeah, I don't think it said anything revolutionary or new. These are not ideas that we haven't like already explored on this podcast. The fraud of the American dream, the nature and transactional nature of wealth and the excess of it, the transactional nature of sex work, how class is something that you really can't transcend in most cases. Yeah, none of these ever like new ideas that made me think about things in different ways. I just thought this was a very poignant story that incorporated all of those themes, if that makes sense.
And I felt like the film in some ways was reaching for that. Like I did feel a desire for that, and then just kind of it let itself settle into being like, this is a poignant, the camera's just taking things and make what you will. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm making that up, but I felt like a push-pull between wanting to really have a defiant like point of view, and that's like classically Sean Baker also is like, I don't like talking, like naming my politics. I like that a Ben Shapiro and like the left can appreciate this film kind of thing. And I felt that this wanted to kind of leave that and didn't.
Sure.
Like wanted to shape, because like you said, it was this is more of a narrative than other ones and more closer to like a mainstream. And it was clearly like trying to flip Pretty Woman on its head.
Yeah. It was like the real Pretty Woman.
Yeah. And I really wanted it to lean into that a little bit more of like decisively. I kept thinking about like, I did keep thinking about films we've seen like, personally, for me, I was like, I would take Showgirls like over this.
Oh wow!
Just in terms of like the distinct qualities. This,
Do you think it was the sense of humor throughout the movie that kind of softened?
No, I wanted it. I thought like lean in more to the sense of humor, or like lean into certain tone choices further. And I think I just wanted more decisive point of view from the director.
Well, one thing he definitely thinks is that people with this much money are fucking horrendous people who should not exist. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Vanya for a second, because on my first watch, I remember just thinking like, oh, of course, he's like a little boy, whatever, he sucks. But on this watch, I was like, oh, he is the villain of the movie, much, much more than his parents. And it's a really interesting character choice, because he is a little boy. He says he's 21 or whatever, but throughout the movie he is just displaying
he looks like a little boy.
He looks like a little boy, and he is just displaying his immaturity every single opportunity. The first time he invites Annie over, they go into the room and he's like, oh, they didn't make my bed, don't they fucking know anything? And she's like, what do you want? He's like, I don't know, sex, just like so infantile. He's constantly playing video games. just getting fucking ripped ass stoned all day long, shirking whatever tiniest little bits of responsibilities. This kid has never known a day of hard work in his life. He has never known struggle. He has only ever known to boss people around and give him every single thing he wants.
And as he said in his own words, whether it's true or not, but I kind of believed it, you know, when he's like, she says, he's like, that scene where he's like, are you happy? He's like, I'm always happy. And I think like it's true. I think like just like, yeah, I'm fucking always happy. Like happy maybe on a surface level, clearly not like fulfilled, doesn't have deep love from his parents, doesn't know, you know, but like the happiness that like can keep you arrested in development when you're that fucking rich. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, no, on serotonin wise, he's doing great, you know? He is.
Except for the come down. I'm sure like no matter how much money can't protect you from the come downs from that amount of drugs, that amount of partying.
That's true.
They don't have a cure for that kind of hangover yet.
Yeah, although at that age, you know, you still, it still feels, you're still like everything, you know, my life's ahead of me. It still could go good. You know, the really serious depression doesn't set in until like you approach your 30s, I think. But then by the end of the movie, just like the spineless fecklessness of this little fucking shit, I just wanted to fucking strangle him. I was so angry and disgusted.
His performance was fucking fantastic.
You know what? Side note real fast. Yura Borisov, who played Igor, is the other one from this movie who's there's like he'll probably be nominated for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah.
I don't know where the momentum. I thought he was very, very, very good. Don't get me wrong. But I thought the kid, Alex Edelstein, whoever played Vanya, and Karen Karagulian, who played Toros, both gave like spectacular performances. So I'm like confused why Igor has kind of ascended as like the other big awards
I think that's
contender.
Kind of part of the problem with the film, and yet I do think I just think he's just as soon as he came on, and you're like we didn't necessarily know if he was going to be the leading character. You know, you don't necessarily know when you first meet him. He could just be a guy. His presence. You're like, that's a fucking movie star.
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
That fucking guy has something you cannot learn.
You're 100% right.
And so I think that's part of it. And I think it's also part of like, he is ultimately the savior of this. He saves Annie. Mm-hmm. He is like the
he's the
prince. So I think we like to give the prince a prize.
Yeah, so I think it's probably I guess it's more of like a
and
meta
he's
narrative.
He's good. He was sitting there. I'm like, that's a star. Like
it's that intangible thing. Well, I don't want to get too far on that, but yeah, back to Vanya real fast. But yeah, by the end, it's such a strong choice that this kid just doesn't even deal with anything. You know, it's like it's one thing for the villain of the movie to come down and be like, these are the things I actually hated you the whole time. I actually don't care. This was all part of my plan or whatever. And he has like a little bit of a moment like that, but it's all rooted in avoidance. And I think that is such a strong, it says so much.
Literally runs away.
The whole time he's just like, I don't want to talk about my parents. Well, we'll talk about that later. You know, just complete avoidance. And what a luxury that is. What a luxury it is to be able to avoid all of what little problems in your life you have.
Yes, and it's such a like, when you really look into it, like such a great blueprint for how dangerous and violent, like it's only going to beget a monster, because there's so much privilege, but you see so many of the ways in which the lack of anything human, any intimacy from his parents, from anyone, is just going to inevitably create the kind of monster that capital deserves and demands to keep going, to continue a system, right? Like, it really shows how I'm thinking about Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. Have you read this book?
No, I have not.
I've only gotten halfway through it, but it's called The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. But it talks about both Trump and Hillary Clinton and their childhoods, and like the politics behind, just like the role of that early childhood trauma. And you see it here, and like capitalism's effects on that, on like the dehumanization And of course, those at the top get it the worst because they have to be so dehumanized to be those in charge of such a dehumanizing system. So you're like, it makes sense that like a Trump's childhood was probably very close to this.
Sure.
Musk's childhood was very close to this, you know? So yeah, I guess my point of, and like they get that part too, where you're like, this guy is a scary kid. Like, this is a scary kid.
Very scary.
And will become a scary adult.
The way he treats he just treats everyone like an object. He treats everything like a transaction, even with his, you know, quote unquote friends. It's a very, very every relationship he has is transactional, because when you accrue that much wealth, when maintaining your wealth becomes one of the central tenets of your life, or in his case, when you're raised by people where maintaining your wealth and status are the central tenets of your life, it creates people who are built to believe that life is just a series of transactions, from sex to love to friendship to parties to fun to it's all just transactional. And yeah, and I think this movie, it does such a good job of showing the disgusting excess of extreme wealth and just making it look so disgusting. Even though it's shot so bright, it's so glossy, it looks, you know, at moments you're like, oh, that does look kind of fun, but then you just like take in a second like what is actually happening right below the surface. Like, none of these other kids are in Vanya's life if he's not a fucking billionaire. You know, they're all gone. They don't give a shit about him. He has nothing to offer.
Nor is Annie.
Nor is Annie. Obviously, nor is Annie. But I feel like she's the one that is the most. She, at least, we understand where that is coming from for her. There is a material need that she is chasing. She needs money, and this guy's a money fountain. You know, he's just like, great, she's gonna put up with his childish bullshit, let him play video games while his arm is around her, let him fuck her so terribly. That's another thing I really liked, was the sex scenes. You're like, oh, this kid is bad at sex. I
think where it gets funky, a little funky, and understandable too. I mean, I'm still trying to debate how I feel about it. It's like, but she also wants the fairy tale. I mean, it's clear that they're putting that in there. She wants not only the American dream, but like the Cinderella story. So yes. I think she's really trying, you know, whether she would, you know, and in the pursuit of that, which I think is tied to marriage, to most marriage. I mean, it makes it so clear that so much, even though they're like, yeah, let's get married, and it's a very clear, the transaction here is very clear from, yeah, you paid me $10K to be your girlfriend for a week, but like, of course you'll, like, marriage means you'll pay me this much to be your wife.
Yeah.
That happens so often, we just don't name, I mean, that is literally what our culture, like, age is old of like, this is the transaction of marriage, is like, but we're saying it out loud here.
Yeah.
And it was so nice, you know, seeing it there. And also how this romantic myth and the American dream, like how romanticizing in that way does the job of making that, pushing that forward and making it like, you know, helping her not see the red flags. And I don't know. I mean, parts of it, I'm like, okay, I could see how she's ignored, but she knew that wasn't his house.
Sure. There's a little bit of ignoring the clear signs that something is amiss happening.
Yeah, she wanted the fuckboy not to be the fuckboy so she could have her American dream.
But I think this movie does such a good job of really, I'm so sorry to our married listeners, underscoring the sometimes transactional nature of marriage on its own, especially here in the U.S. As we're talking right now.
I'm going to say sometimes. I mean, I think even if there's something else there, there's always, you can't be in a system that gives a married couple tax benefit, you know, that changes your financial makeup and say, like, I think there can be other things, but it is always transactional.
Sure. I guess, yes, you're right. In the legal sense.
Yeah. And material sense. Like, it's going to, like, even the things that, like, my partner and I think about, if I'm like, oh, if I'm going to get married, I mean, I get the romance, you know, some people, they really, there's the history and the whatever, but, like, I have to think, I'm like, oh, as freelancers, I've done the math. It's actually going to fuck us up more. Like, no, off the table. It's going to fuck us up. And if it changes, we will get married.
And in sometimes the most cynical cases, you know, people marrying solely for the material upshot. As we were talking, it made me think of, remember that TikTok sound that was going around this summer? The woman who made a little beat and was like, I'm looking for a man in finance. 6'5", blue eyes. Trust fund, blah, 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 whatever that was.
Blue eyes, finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes, finance.
And I don't remember if that girl was doing it in earnest or if she was like.
I think the original one was earnest, and then they took her.
Okay. Well, if it was earnest or if it was a joke, either way, it was identifying something that there are people who are solely thinking about marriage, which let's be real, which is like committing yourself to someone for the rest of your life in a purely transactional way. I need to find someone.
Did I tell you that I'm rewatching Mad Men?
You did mention that, yeah.
I mean,
for sure. That's all. That's in there for sure. And it's sad. It's so sad that capitalism has rendered a society where some people think, I will commit my life, my heart, my mind, my body, my children, my future to someone based on their bank account. If that alone isn't enough to indict this fucking system, then God, what else? So many other things, obviously. But that I thought was such a strong part of this movie. Even though she wants the Cinderella story, the proposal scene is so heartbreaking because she does know that, like, she knows that this is probably bullshit. And she keeps saying, like, don't fuck with me. Stop. Don't fucking tease me. Don't fuck with me. Don't fuck around. You cannot joke about this stuff because she knows that, like, if this were to happen, it would instantly, and if it were to actually happen in the way that she envisions, the happily ever after, the Cinderella story, it instantly changes the entire course and trajectory of her entire life. Which makes the ending that much more devastating. That she knew, like, I think you're right. She's like, it's like that thing you do in your early 20s or when you're a younger person dating in the world where you're just like, I'm feeling these things, I'm thinking these things, but I think I'm just going to kind of bury them down because I don't know how to process or articulate them yet. And maybe I don't want to believe them, or maybe it's like safer and more comforting for me to ignore them. I know I did that a lot as a younger person dating, and
that was for me, not for you. No, that was me being like, yeah, Frank really did. No, me thinking about myself.
I'm sure everyone has those experiences, but yeah.
If you're in your 20s listening, just know
it's gonna be all right,
and you don't need an Igor to help get you there. We all want an Igor, but you don't need an Igor to help get you there. You could get there and then find your Igor. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is something I noticed on this watch, which I thought was really a fun metaphor. The first time they go to the candy shop and their two friends are like, yeah, do whatever the fuck you want. Like, our owner is old as shit. Like, fucking take whatever. I was like, oh, they're literally doing kids in a candy shop.
Yeah.
I was like, that's great. That's so smart. And I didn't even clock it the first time around. And what that must feel like, what that must do to someone if just like the entire world is your playground and everything is at your disposal. God, that must.
And I think Mikey Madison does a great job of these moments. I guess this is where I want to. There are certain things that, because this is such a, like, there's not a huge amount of close-ups, and there's a lot of, like, and I think that's the cinema verite angle of, like, let the camera sit and you're seeing everything and you're taking it all. There are moments that I'm like, I do wish we had some more private moments with Annie. There's some things that, like, which, again, taste, I acknowledge, but, like, clocking their journey, there's some really subtle stuff she's doing that's incredible, but just the way she's taking in, like, there's a moment when they're at Vegas and he's like, yeah, put it all in, and she's like, yeah, put it all in, just like the way she looks at, just the way she's kind of like following what's really happening. But, like, that's our lens, that's the most important lens, because if you miss any of that subtlety, it can become Euphoria-esque, washed over you. And I just wish there was, like, a little bit more decision to be attentive to, like, that, to Annie as our centerpiece. And those really subtle choices, which I thought were great. But just, like, it's all hitting her. Like, we don't really land with her until the end, which would be fine if I didn't think that last ending scene made me just grossed out. But I wanted just that landing with her. Like, I think there's so few times she's alone. One of them is on the train. There's so few moments where she's alone.
Yeah.
And I wanted a few more just chosen moments. It doesn't have, and maybe, just to balance that out where we're just with her processing, because I wanted her to have more agency. I just really fucking did. And I never felt that the film gave that to her. And I felt she as an actor is fighting for it.
I mean, to me, I interpret that as she doesn't have agency in throughout this story. It's a story of a woman with very little agency just by dint of who she is paired with throughout this movie. It's
Sure.
From starting as just working for Vanya to then becoming his wife to then having to endure this assault by these three men. I think it's very much, to me at least, I took it as a story of a woman, a very obviously very strong-willed, opinionated, tough, smart, sharp woman, but who is, because of her class, because of her status, because of the nature of sex work, is put throughout multiple scenarios where her agency is intentionally stripped from her.
Yeah.
At least.
But I guess I mean like agency as the storyteller. Like you can always find a way in more into that personal space. And if that was the choice, then I think, because I've seen a lot of reads where it feels like she uses her sex to get agency. And that's why the end reads as it ends, because it's the first time she's disarmed and not allowed to have that power with Igor.
Oh, interesting. I took that. I want to talk about the ending at the end, but
I was just pointing out, like, yeah, I loved, like, when you kind of get in and there are those moments when the camera does land on Mikey. I wanted more of those because that really gives us that, her taking in Vegas as fast as it's all happening. It was just the great moments of her just watching of like, holy shit, okay, this is my new life. But like, she's never been around that kind of well, then she has to perform it as if it's, she's performing girlfriend. But the moments where we get behind the mask, I wanted more opportunities for that.
That's fair. I think that's totally fair. There are the little moments. There are the little moments that
they're there. Like, I wanted
yeah.
him to exploit it more as a director taste. But I do think they're there.
They're definitely there. I think I know exactly the moment you're talking about at the craps table when when he says he's going all in, and she has that look of just like, my God, that's like fucking $20,000. That's,
yeah, it's so good.
It could just be gone.
And the way she does it is brilliant. And some people would be like, no, then it wouldn't be subtle. And like, that's cool. I'm just arguing for less subtle in some of these moments.
Sure. Or like the moment after, a moment I really liked was the morning after New Year's where they wake up at 5 p.m. And he's like, no, don't go. And like her character breaks. Like the character of Annie breaks. And she's like, dude, I got fucking shit to do. Like, I have to fucking go. Like,
that's it. I think that you saying character break, and because I know even in hearing Mikey Madison talk about how she pursued this role, like feeling like, put as a sex worker, just like being aware of like when your body is commodified and that is your means of making, you're a wage worker and you sell your body, and that's not just sex workers, that's most laborers. But like the break moment of like, I wanted more opportunities to see, because that I think gives agency, even if she doesn't have agency in this world. It just lets us know this is more agency for her to be like, this is my film. Like, I get her name, that Anora is the lead, but I do feel like at times it gets pulled away from, and I wanted that, like, this is my film. This is about my fucking internal, what's under the mask. And like, yeah, like you said, it breaking character. I love those moments. And I wanted more.
Well, that's a good segue to the moment where Toros, Garnick, and Igor show up at the house, which is, like I was saying earlier, this is the sequence where the first time watching it, if you don't know what's coming in the movie, and I think this feels intentional, but you're like, don't, like, you as the audience member are like, do not fucking hurt this girl. Yep. Like, I am so scared for her. I am like 999,000 times out of a million, this goes very poorly. And this does not, it obviously doesn't go well. And there's violence and there's assault. All of that is baked in here. But it does take the turns where it's played almost farcically, and that is also intentional. I remember the first moment when she's shouting at Toros over the phone, and Garnick just is like holding the phone up for her to, and then she's like yelling so much, he's just like, I'm just gonna put it down on the table so you can just yell at the phone. And you're like, oh, they're doing something a little screwball here, and
this was my favorite sequence.
It kind of waffles back and forth between those two tones. And which is something I don't really know I've seen that often, where you're like, on one hand, very scared for this girl, but on the other hand, you're
Like
like
Scorsese does it, like reaches that tone at times.
sure, yeah.
King of New York. I feel like it reminded me of King of New York a little.
I've never seen King of New York.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So would you say, speaking of agency, that this sequence, even though she is being talked down to, insulted, physically restrained, accosted, held down, tied up, gagged, all that stuff, do you feel like her putting up the fight that she did and ultimately kicking the shit out of these guys, do you feel like that is a moment of agency, or do you feel like that agency is something separate from that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're right in saying, like, when I was using agency before, maybe it was, I think, not right, like the desire to see under her mask and more like get into really like what is happening for this what is happening behind the mask of this female psychologically, rather than just like us observing what is happening to her, you know, more opportunities for that. So here, I don't know if it solves that per se, like that predicament. It was where I was like, okay, this is, I think actually what you're, yeah, I don't know about the agent in terms of the agency question, meaning like, when I'm saying agency, I think I keep going back to the end of just being like, I wanted her to be her own liberating force. And I think they gave so much of that responsibility to Igor.
Sure.
And I just felt like that wasn't necessary. And that was what just like really kind of let me down. Because in this scene, you feel the potential for it and it's exciting. And like you said, we're kind of like have this unexpected genre shift. It's getting slapsticky. Like there's so much potential. And then I just felt like, oh, it's him all along. Like, you know, it wasn't the fuckboy, it was the Prince Charming, you know? It was like who saw her for who she really was, Anora, you know? Pissed me off. But this scene I loved. This is where I felt like, I guess, and talking about wanting strong choices, I felt like, oh, we have a choice about tone. There's so much happening. Yeah, she's gonna kick that, like, you know, it's imperfect. I don't need her to be like make perfect choices. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think it's great that she's like, I'm gonna scream rape. I'm gonna like, you know, whatever she has to do. It's and I think what you were saying before about like, yeah, it's playing with the fact that we've just, if we're raised in America media, how many times have you seen like a Russian hooker be killed on SVU? You know, like how many times have you seen those tropes where you're bracing yourself for men with guns and you're bracing them to rape her? And so it is hilarious when she screams rape and they're all like, whoa, we're not here to rape you. Mm-hmm. But she's touching on, you know, turning all those things on their head. I thought that was great.
But that moment specifically follows the moment where they hold her down and pull the ring off of her finger, which is so
brutal.
So brutal. I wrote down so brutal. Like, it's so hard to watch. It's a simple, you know, it's a simple moment where they are not intending to hurt her, but it is such a stripping of dignity and stripping of agency and control in this situation, and whatever feeling of security that she had built up until this point. It just hit so hard this time. And also Toros like yelling at her like, you do not know who this kid is. You don't know who he is, which is true. They've only known each other for 2 weeks. And I don't know, I'm sure we've all been, I know I have been in situations where you meet someone, you think you're getting to know them, and then you're like, oh, you're someone completely different than what I thought, or what you were presenting to me.
When you're that age, you fall in love in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I think both things are true. You fall in love in 2 weeks, and I also think she doesn't fucking care. That's how it is. What are you talking about? Like, look at the world. I mean, like we were talking about before, you're like, yeah, people marry their secretaries on Mad Men in a week. Like,
yeah, no.
And in reality, I just think like both things are true. But you're right. The symbolism of pulling it's like she's screaming, and it is a version of, I mean, it's obviously like not rape, but I mean, like they're stealing this wealth off her hand. And also for us as the viewer being like, because this shit oligarch just went running, and now the working class characters are left to literally fight over this symbol of wealth.
And I think he does I think Baker makes the really strong choices of showing you what these guys are sacrificing to do this fucking dirty work for this oligarch. Toros leaving in the middle of the baptism. So funny, like literally handing the baby back to his wife and being like, I'm so sorry, I gotta go. And just like them repeat it, and like Garnet getting his nose broken and then being like fucked up on pills for the rest of the movie. When we eventually find out that the entire day was Igor's birthday, you know, like we're seeing how these guys are also eating so much shit for this family. And it doesn't excuse what they do, and it doesn't excuse that their complicity in working for this family and their complicity in assaulting Annie and breaking into their home and restraining her. But they're not just like faceless goons. You're like, oh, these guys are they're working. They're working right now. And they would rather not be at work. They hate that they are at work right now.
Yeah, and Toros is actually a religious figure. What is he? What is his role?
I think that's just a baptism.
Oh, it's just for his family.
I think that's the baptism, and he's the godfather. I think that's what
godfather. Okay,
that's what they say at some point.
Even that, all of that's, yeah. And that's where, like, and I loved Igor the most. I mean, you know what's going to happen. You're like, and I'm not against their relationship, and I think it is really fascinating. I do think he gets some of that and I don't know if it's because of just how he doesn't say as much. He does get to be the observer.
Yes.
And he does get to have a certain level of moral authority. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even know. I'm hesitant saying moral authority, but we immediately trust him because of his observance of this situation. And I think she has some of that early on. I think there was more to be also mined from that relationship, to be honest. Like, this is a long movie, and a lot of time is spent on, like, other areas where I'm just like, again, I think there could have been more mined from Mikey Madison's performance.
I think that's fair. He's also the lowest on the totem pole, other than Annie in this scenario. Amongst all these people, he's like he's the third of the three goons. You know, he has the least amount of authority. So I feel like the movie is saying something about the class status of both of these characters, and him being the lowest rung, having to watch this girl who I understand by the end. He's like, understandably, I understand why she reacted this way. And clearly, as you said, like, they very much position him as the observer, watching all of these indignities that she has to suffer at the hands of this family.
And so something happened when I was watching where I'm like, I trust his point of view the most. Mm-hmm. And again, I think that's why the end I felt a little bit like played.
Sure. Vanya calls him a gopnik a couple times, and Annie calls him a gopnik at the end as well. I was like, what's a gopnik? Looked it up. A gopnik is a member of a delinquent subculture in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and other former Soviet republics. A young man of working class background who usually lives in the suburbs. Young men from working class areas rebelled against neoformali, nonconformists, and often fought with people from punk movements, rappers, and other lovers of Western music who became popular in the Soviet Union in the 80s. So
fascinating.
So like young working class men who were carrying through the revolutionary spirit, and I guess the Gopnik movement really peaked in the 80s and 90s when they were like, no, we're still Soviets, like, stop with this Western bullshit. So like rooted in a very, very working class communist experience. So I thought that was interesting that
And you're right, and how he gets tied into this. Like, he's like, can I go now? They're like, no, you're getting in the car.
Yeah, everyone's just trying to go home the whole time. They're like, why do we have to keep doing this?
And how much she resents him for being, she has reason to resent him. He is, they're like, you fucking restrained me and tied me down. You're not innocent here.
No. Do you want to talk about, like, the courtroom scene or the clerk scene in Vegas at all? I felt like that was just played for pretty broad comedy for the most part.
Yeah. Again, it was quite long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we have to, was there anything political you wanted to touch on in it?
Nothing political. Other than the fact that, like, this oligarch is able to get a court date the morning of, and there's all these threats of, like, get us this fucking court date or we're going to cut ties with your firm. So just, like, I don't know, the amount of power and influence that the wealthy carry with it just within the justice system. The only moment in there that I thought was really worth talking about is the scene on the steps of the plane on the way to Vegas when Annie finally gets Vanya to actually respond to her, and he's standing on the steps. He's above her. She's below him. Mm-hmm. Status, materialized. And he says, he's like, yeah, we're going to get a divorce. What are you, stupid? And just his dismissiveness of her in that moment. And then the audacity of this little fucking prick to then thank her for making my last trip to America so fun. That was the moment where I was like, guillotine this kid. There's nothing, he will not, he is not going to add one iota of value to the human experience. Like, this kid is you're right, he's a Trump. He's going to turn into a Trump.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know about guillotining a 21-year-old, but
Sure. You're right.
Rehabilitate. Let's rehabilitate him.
Rehabilitate. Yeah. Strip him of his wealth. Make him actually,
Yeah.
sentence him to 2 years of working in a restaurant, which I think should be mandatory service for all Americans. Have I ever told you this?
No.
Yeah, like how the IDF or like some countries require mandatory military service. I think in America, if everyone was mandated to work, it doesn't have to be 2 years. It could be 1 year. 1 year of service work. I think you fix most of the problems in American society.
Yeah, no, I think that was a super strong scene. And then further on the plane, when she is still, because she's still pleading with him, like, come on, we don't have to do this. Even after that scene, right? The plane, oh no, the courtroom's after the plane.
The courtroom is before the plane, and then they go to the clerk in Vegas. Oh, but actually before that, Annie has her moment where she threatens Galina, and she's like, I'm going to get a lawyer, I'm going to sue, and I'm going to get half because I didn't sign a prenup. And for a moment, you're like, fuck yeah, yes, Annie, get their asses. And then it's taken away so fast. She's just like, I'll destroy you. Yeah. Like, I'll destroy you, I'll destroy everyone you love, I will take every single thing that you have if you even think about trying that. And she's right. She's right. Not right like she's right to do that, but like that will happen. That fighting, even legally, with someone of this staggering amount of wealth and power rarely, if ever, results in a victory for the little guy, the little woman.
And then they're on the plane and she has to hear him say to his parents, I was just like, what's the big deal? I just like rented a hooker for a week. And then she's like, I think that was like the turning point to just hear him really say that to his parents.
And I did just for the sake of comedy and whatever little catharsis we can get of putting this fucking disgusting family in their place, just between the plane and the clerk in Vegas, just how she's just reading him and dressing their entire family down and just cutting the shit out of them. You needed some, because like obviously she's not going to win. She's not going to be materially victorious over this family or this kid, but she can fucking read their asses and make them look at themselves in the mirror for a minute. And I thought all of that was really great, saying like, your son hates you so much that he married me. And the dad just like starting to laugh because of the absurdity of it all. And you're like, you guys are just like, what the rot of this level of wealth is incredible.
And it's interesting too, because I noticed this happen. I've just been thinking a lot about, maybe it's because of Blake Lively popping up now. And, I've been thinking so much about the role of the blonde woman next to the white man in proximity of power, and just how much like how they are the shield for this guy, right? Because the mom is the one that we were like, is the devil, and is the, in this, even though he's the fucking, he gets to sit back and laugh, and she becomes the face of like the one to be fought with.
Oh yeah, sure.
Just made me think a lot about, I've just been thinking about that a lot, like how easy it is to hate a blonde white woman and how useful that is. That's a real,
I didn't even,
for power. I've just been, I didn't
clock that, yeah.
Thinking about it a lot, and she totally is that, because we're like, all the scenes of like, that we're like, fuck that, you're like, fuck that bitch, and he just gets to kind of like be in the background. And that's how they all work.
Yeah, actually hearing you say that makes me think that Nikolai, the father, was probably also the son of an oligarch.
Oh yeah.
As we know that this level of wealth is not usually earned, it is almost always inherited. So this is probably the result of like Nikolai being just some fuckboy who never gave a shit about anything, and marrying someone who's like, I'm going to fight fucking tooth and nail to get this money and to keep this money and to maintain our status. And how you're right, is given the privilege and the luxury to just sort of sit back and laugh in the moment. You could imagine like an older Vanya reacting similarly to his
and why
father.
She has to fight, like why her true fight of, you're embarrassing us, you're this, because she has something to hold on to. For him, it's just like fucking, it's a game, because it's always going to be there. And
then we get the moment where, and then it's really when Igor steps up, as you're saying, Prince Charming, and says in the Las Vegas clerk's room, like, I think Vanya should apologize to Annie.
Love him for it. We're getting our Cinderella story after all, which is fine in that moment. Again,
for me, okay. So we're at the end. The Cinderella story, yes. The Prince Charming, yes. Like that's all there. It's like, oh, secretly the one was right in front of you all along. But I felt, at least in my read, that it was a moment of solidarity, like working class solidarity on behalf of Igor. And in my estimation, I don't think he believes that Annie's suddenly going to be in love with him. I don't think he thinks that that's where the trajectory of this story is going.
No.
If anything, she's repeatedly said to him, like, you're fucking psychopath. You disgust me. I don't even want to be near you at all. So
totally there.
Total class solidarity, just like, hey, I think he should apologize to this girl for everything he put her through. And then they take the plane back together. They fly coach, which is a really stark contrast to all of the wealth that we have seen up until this point. They spend one last night in the house together, which I want to touch on quickly because they have the conversation, they have the debate about she's like, you assaulted me. And he's like, I didn't assault you. And he's like, yes, you did. You assaulted me. And for me, I don't know. I kind of like, he did assault her. Obviously, he assaulted her. But what did you feel like? I felt like it was like him trying to, I guess, rationalize or justify what his job required of him, and sort of like kind of shirking off responsibility of how he also played a role in subjugating physically and assaulting this girl. Did you think there was anything more there, or was that just kind of?
I'm thinking back. I was like tracking the trajectory of the red scarf, which I thought was interesting. Right? Like, which is the scarf he uses to assault her, like to tie, she does assault him too, but she's defending herself.
So
it's not the same.
It's
then
not the same.
That scene where they're walking through, they're on the boardwalk and she's cold and he brings the scarf. And I love when she turns it on him and she's like, because he's like, you're cold. I'm not going to do that, but he's like, you're cold. You need to wear the scarf, which is so paternal and Prince Charming and sweet. And she's like, are you fucking kidding me? You brought that so you were gonna tie me up again. And she's so right. Like, why he didn't bring the scarf because he thought maybe he brought the scarf because that's his job, and calls him out on it. But then she needs to take the scarf, which feels to me that's where the tropey part came. It was just like, okay, and I get it, we want the romance, but like it felt a little like she didn't fucking need to take the scarf. It could have why'd she need? She's cold, fine, I have to take the scarf. And then here there was like a little bit of that between them too, because they did make the choice for there to be something romantic sized between the two of them. Like, there was like the hints of that too. I can't remember the question, but there was something about the scarf and like the question, like that to me represented that question of like, because they've talked about it, like this movie's so much about consent, which is interesting because we can't not talk about intimacy coordinator piece of it.
Is there a thing? Is there a controversy, as the Brits like to say?
I guess there's something interesting to talk about. I just think in general, but like the scarf kind of to me represents like I think he even gets I don't think he like for all the whole like I see you because I like Anora and like I think that's what you do ultimately I took away from it. I'm like I feel like what the film is trying to say is that he through this working class solidarity sees something in her that the other men can't. And I don't think he fucking sees her really either. And I wish there was a stronger take on that where she's like, where we get like, you also don't see me. You're also still sexualizing me and you're also still playing into a role that you can't help because you're also not free from the patriarchy and their class system. Where like, you still think you're giving me this scarf as a kind gesture, and you brought that scarf because it's your job to maybe tie me up. And I like the play on it. I just wish there was more. I didn't feel like it was like either go into more deeper complexity with it, but to me, an ambiguous ending like that between the two of them, which again, I don't think is ambiguous, didn't solve that problem.
Wait, see, I'm going to push back because you said like, I wish he saw her more. He's literally positioned multiple times, and they do the framing of this where he is just watching the most vulnerable, brutal moments of her experience.
Yes, totally.
Like that moment outside of the plane when Vanya says, "Are you stupid?"
Yes.
Igor is standing right behind her, and he's like watching this, and he's like, oh,
That's
this is
yes.
fucking brutal
Totally,
for this girl. What this girl is going through is absolutely brutal. And then after she dresses them all down on the plane, he pours her the vodka and hands it to her. Like
that's what we're positioned to see. And I think the fact that he can see that, but he can't see his own role inside of it, is very real. But I wish it had been called out more. I wish there had been more guns stuck to, like, no, you really did assault me, which I don't get. I don't think it's resolved. I think we ultimately feel like he really does see her. I think that's why I think at the end he sort of becomes the moral arbitrator. Like, we really are like, he sees everything.
Sure. I feel like the assault conversation they have is an example of how especially men in these circumstances will find the rationalization for their actions, especially their violent actions, of like, no, well, this is my job, I had to do this. And I think, at least for me, and on the second watch as the audience, I'm like, he doesn't even, like, he is not aware yet of his complicity in everything that has happened to this woman.
Yeah.
And I feel like that moment is deflated. And you're right. I think that moment could have gone harder in making him see how he is part of maintaining these systems and complicit in this. But it takes a left turn, and they have the thing about, like, she's like, you wanted to rape me. Why didn't you want to rape me? And like that doesn't land. That doesn't get us anywhere. And then she just ends it by calling him an F-word ass bitch.
So it's like almost there with him.
It's almost
and he's
there.
actually not fully. And then they don't deal with it in the car scene. Just anything that could have been there, I felt like.
Okay, let's talk about the final moment. What was your...
So the final moment, for anyone who's just remembering, because you should watch this movie before you hear us ruin it, but he gives her back. I mean, he's taken the ring, which as we...
He's dropping her off at her house. Yeah. He's unloaded her baggage. She stays in the car. Oh, no, wait, first, you're right. First, he gives her the ring.
Which is, like, great story-wise, because as we talked about, the ring has been just such a, like, symbol of all of this. It was so horrible to watch him assault her and take it off, because he's forced to in his position. And then he's able to bring it back to her because it's hers, and we know he's risking a lot in doing so.
Yeah, he says, don't tell Toros.
Yeah. And then she stays in the car, and she looks over, gets on top of him.
Well, first she says, this car is so you.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, do you like it? And she's like, no. And he says, it's my grandmother's car.
Right. Which goes back to, I'm sure it was there. It was, like, very clear. But, like, she speaks Russian because her grandmother never learned English. Anora, obviously her Russian name. She goes by Annie in the workplace. Like, this is how she, I think her sister calls her Anora. I was like, clocked. Like,
okay.
But she's very, like, that's a protective mechanism in terms of, like, the little things you have when you're in a labor force and you're commodified in your body. Yeah. So the fact that he has said earlier, like, oh, I like Anora. And she's like, okay. Goes back to this sort of, like, he sees her in a way that nobody else does, but also the class solidarity, which I do think is truthful and is there. So then after that, she gets on top of him, right?
Yes.
They start to have sex. And then he goes in for a kiss. She stops him.
Well, he grabs her by the back of the neck.
Right.
You feel like maybe he's, I don't know, maybe he's coming in that moment. It's like, but he grabs her by the back of the neck and is trying to pull her in close for a kiss. And she stops him, which we saw. I mean, in terms of what kissing means, we've seen obviously in the workplace established in the beginning, sit on your hands. Like, there's no kissing unless she tells you, unless you, like, when he rents her as a girlfriend for a week, they're kissing. Unless she's consented to kissing, yeah.
Right. And there she says no. And then he forces her, right?
No. He's, like, trying to pull her in for a kiss, and then she just pulls back, slaps him, hits him a few times, and then breaks down crying.
Right. Because the pull in for a kiss is a little... I mean, she's pulling away. Right. And then he slaps her. I'm literally doing the playback now. And it's really, I mean, what he really wants is to, like, look her in the eyes and have this moment of intimacy. Yeah. Which she then hits him, slaps him, and then breaks down crying. And that's the end of the movie. And the crying, like, really, for the whole time, we don't see her. I mean, she so has to keep it. I mean, she has to do so much to fight as, like, the lowest commodity in this, in this movie. And even, I will say, even with the slapstick, like, we know danger's around any corner. Like, we know what could be done to her. She could be disappeared and nobody would know. So the relief that she survives it, but that he gives her that agent, that he gives her that moment is what ultimately disturbed me.
So you read it as relief.
a combo. I mean, not just relief. I think I read it as all the things, but yes, as like this is like, I'm done, as the sorrow, as like a realization, as a moment of like realization.
Yeah. A moment of, yeah.
If anything, the first, like, she can kind of come to terms with, holy fuck, everything in a pure, raw, emotional way, not an intellectual way.
No, for sure. I think there's obviously a myriad of emotions all building up to, the release of that cry, that weeping. I see on the first watch, I was kind of like, whoa, very, very ambiguous. Very good, Sean Baker. On this watch, I actually kind of felt like I tracked all of the emotional beats of it, where he gives her the ring, obviously, a giving of a ring is a romantic gesture traditionally, but in this moment, there's the inherent romanticism of it, but it's really him being like, yo, here's another like $50,000, here's like, for all the shit you went through, you deserve to have this ring, do with it as you will, get some more out of this terrible experience. And when he says that it's his grandmother's car, I mean, for me, she sees him as someone that she shares a class with, and sees him for the first time as a human and not just like a fucking thug. And maybe realizing what those small moments of solidarity that he has shown her have meant throughout this last part of the film. And then the sex, I read as this is her trade. This is her
transaction, her way of thinking.
This is her transaction. Mm-hmm. This is the way that when she is given something, when she is paid, when she is shown kindness up until this point, that means that I'm going to give you sex, because that is what, in her mind, that is what I have to offer as a female presenting person with this body. That's all I can offer. And then once he tries for that bit of intimacy, I think there's obviously some like a trauma response of what she just went through. Like his hand is around her, so she's quite obviously roughly fucking freaked out by it. But also just
he's not quite. I wouldn't exactly call him tender there.
No. You're right. It's a strong.
Hence,
a strong
back
grasp.
To like the scarf, the red scarf. Like, is this the red scarf that he thinks it is?
Mm-hmm. And having that trauma response of what she just went through, and I'm sure she's experienced assault many other times throughout her course of her life, especially as a sex worker, and sort of like the floodgates of all of that hitting her, and then of course being like, what the fuck did I just go through? All sort of like pouring out in one moment. So
and him embracing her, yeah.
I understand, and if like you or anyone else is like, it sucks that like Igor is the guy who just like comes along and helps her at the end, and then she fucks him and whatever, I think that's totally fair. I read it as this moment of like these two people converging, and the entire lived experience of this girl's life sort of culminating in this one moment of genuine intimacy with a person. Because like, say what you will of all the sex she had with Vanya, none of that was intimate, But like,
I don't know I would call this intimate either. That's my problem, is I think he thinks it is, and I think this is the red scarf thing of it. I don't know that I felt that you can have true intimacy in that much trauma. Like, that was intimacy either. And like, if anything, and that's okay, if anything, maybe there's another layer to that too, and that's okay. It's very subtle, but like how tragic that is too. It's another version of like a hero, I think he thinks that's intimacy. I don't know that that's intimacy for her. And I don't know that, that for her, it's like, that he wants, which I think it's read, I've heard a lot of reads of like, what triggers her is that he is the first one to show her intimacy. And I think that read, which I've heard a lot of people, feels very super, like that to me is the male gaze. That's the like, he liberates her with his capacity for intimacy. And I'm like, that doesn't feel intimate to me. She's told him she doesn't, like you just said, she's like, this is my transaction, this is my power. And the read of like, I can give you this moment of intimacy is what made me feel yucky. And maybe yucky in the same way Anora feels. I didn't feel that was even though Sean Baker says it's ambiguous, I didn't feel that was ambiguous. I felt it was meant to feel like he gives her this moment of intimacy.
See, I didn't feel like it was him giving her this moment of intimacy. At least that wasn't my read of it. And intimate, like, obviously it's not true intimacy.
eye contact.
But more intimate than we have seen up until this point. But I read it as like, no, like she's realizing it. She's realizing in this moment, like, one, he's grabbing me and I'm having a trauma response. Two, why am I fucking this guy right now? Like, why am I doing this? Why did I just why did I just choose to do this? Why did I choose to treat this as a transaction rather than like a moment between two people who just, could have just taken the ring and gone? Why am I doing this? And then on top of like, why has this led me here? Like, why has my life led me to this moment? Why has this all played out the way it has? Because of my class, because of I'm a sex worker, because of all that. So I didn't
brought through him. I guess I just was like, it would be cool if like he did not have to initiate all that for her. But I understand story-wise. And
maybe I'm projecting.
It's not the worst. I don't think it's like. I do think it's like that's where the male gazy leans in, where it's like he does take the action. He is the Prince Charming role in that sense and allows for, I think everything you said is happening for her. I wish there was another conduit for it than that per se. It also felt like a tropey to me. Like to me, I was like, of course.
Very tropey, for sure.
And I was just disappointed. Worst thing in the world? No. Like, bad? I wouldn't even say bad. You know what I mean? Like, not.
Yeah.
Just again goes back to my general being like high hopes, and then I was like, oh damn.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a totally legit criticism. Before we go on to the awards, tell me what's the intimacy coordinator tea?
Yeah. So in an interview with Pamela Anderson, they did like actors on actors? I know it can't be.
Yeah, like actors on actors, whatever.
That's the name of it? Actors on actors? Okay, I guess it wouldn't be actors versus actors. Yeah, actors with actors. She has one, which I'm really excited to see too, The Last Showgirl.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up, Pamela Anderson asks Mikey Madison, did you have an intimacy coordinator? Because there's so much sex in this movie. And she says, no, there was not one. I chose not to have one on set.
Oh.
And I mean, interestingly enough, that basically, this is a huge topic, but I mean, SAG put out a statement after she said that, just basically having to kind of be like, we believe in intimacy coordinators. We don't stand by sort of that, what she said, or that choice.
Interesting.
But for a movie that is all about consent, it brought up a lot to think about, because she'd been working on this project with Sean Baker, I think for at least over a year, had a lot of input in the development of the character. She said that like some of the scenes, even in the direction, like Sean Baker and his wife, who is a producer on it, would actually show them the choreography for the sex by doing it themselves together. Which, easy to be like, what the fuck? I think...
Or miming or pantomiming it. I'm sure they not actually having sex.
Not sure.
Okay. All right.
But let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, like clothes on, like get in this position, do this.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know, whatever.
Who knows? I mean, we don't
need to get it. Yeah.
But I think what the reason intimacy coordination came along is like when you're in this is the age old, like so much questions of consent and what's okay and like on set, and this actually came up. This is a big thing between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni's lawsuit, is like, did he provide an intimacy coordinator? Is there not? Because so much of consent is also a power dynamic, right? Of who can give consent. And I totally actually think there should be a creative agency to say, yeah, I would prefer not to have one. Now the question for me is, there's so many people, there's a lot of sex and intimacy and sexual things happening on this set, that the intimacy coordinator to me isn't just there for the actor themselves. They're also there for the other actors.
Yes, I would have brought up that exact point, that like she's obviously the object of most of this, or the subject of most of this sex, but there are many, 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 many other actors that she's either stripping around, the kid who plays Vanya, like Igor, a lot of other actors who may have wanted an intimacy coordinator.
Yeah. And I think it also brings up being like, I don't even know that intimacy coordinators are really important. It's still like anything else. Like, that's an art form. Who is that person?
Intimacy coordinators can also really suck at their job as I don't know. Did you ever? I don't know.
This is our premium.
You know what? You know what? Fuck it. It's premium. We had an intimacy coordinator at
heard this.
our school.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name names, but it was a professor. And let me tell you, did not make me feel any more intimate or coordinated.
Or
if
safe,
anything,
really, it sounds like.
or safe. If anything, made me feel more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But
well, it's another position. It's like, yeah, but it's like becomes a power position that I understand for an actor who's been working intimately and has like developed real trust with maybe their direct. They're like, well, I would prefer this person I've worked with for a year than someone I don't know to work with. So I think there's so much complexity and nuance. I do think, and Mikey Madison's young and like, but when you bringing that up, just anytime like having conversations about that, it's like knowing like my choice and what's for me does not mean that this is like what is. There's a reason that like there's a huge call. We're figuring out what the role of the intimacy coordinator is, but there's a reason that so many people want them on set and that they protect usually are meant to those with the lowest power on set because most the sexual assault that happens on set usually happens because they're exploiting a role of power to, be it the director or someone else where you can say, but I was just showing them what they were doing or we were in a scene and pushing something beyond what it needed to be. And, we've both, as you just said, I feel like we've both been in positions where it's like, I'm so confused about what I'm supposed to consent to because I just feel like I want to be a good artist and I want to be a team player. And sure, let's make out. Like, and you just don't even know till later that your boundaries were pushed or you didn't consent.
I mean, something in the Blake Lively Baldoni lawsuit was in the birthing scene. He was like, I think you should actually be naked. I think it actually would be better if you were naked. And she was like, we didn't talk about this. Like, I did not consent to this ahead of time. Blah, blah, blah.
And we'll see what happens for the full law. Because apparently he did want intimacy coordinator that she said no to, according to his filing. We'll see. But like, yes, exactly.
Even anecdotally, like that is something that has happened, especially to young women in Hollywood, in infinitum. Just I got on set and then someone told me to do something I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't want to lose my job. I wanted to be a team player, all that. Yeah,
and I think the roles of privilege of like Mikey Madison's young and has had a career where she's been
working. She's been on sets.
She's been working and has been in sets, but has like had a pretty like she's been a leading role in most of the things she's done. And if not leading in a set where you're like, once upon a like the nepotism crew, like you have a certain level of privilege in Hollywood where you might not be, it may not, you can feel like, oh, well, yeah, I can make consent and agency is easy here because you're not aware of how much privilege you have in that role where you're like, yeah, the person who's a day player, it's not, they might need a fucking intimacy coordinator because no one's watching their back in that same way. They don't have the power you have on set.
Exactly. All right, we should get to our. We went long.
I mean, it's a long movie, and there's a lot in there.
It's a long movie, and there's a lot of stuff in here. And I think we got through it all.
Yeah.
I think this is probably the most comprehensive Anora podcast I dare say that anyone has put out yet. So kudos to us. All right, we've got 3 awards for this movie. First award is Best Politics, goes to the character with the best politics in the movie.
Oh. Tricky.
Is it Anora? I mean, Anora is the easy choice. I don't know if she really has a politics.
Well, she says she has the awareness of healthcare and like her role as a worker.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say
she does. Yeah.
And and I think she knows what she sort of deserves. And even though she's young and gets caught up, like she's aware of like she's fighting for what she's like, no, I fucking married this guy. I just,
Yeah.
Anora. Let's give it to Anora because I think I think
it is Anora.
We don't want to get into.
I was going to say maybe her friend Lulu because she seems like a really good friend, but that's less. That's even less. No, you're right. Just on its face, if you give me healthcare, workers' comp, and a 401k, you could tell me when I don't work. That's the best politics I think we see in the movie.
Yeah.
Okay. Worst politics.
Daddy oligarch.
Daddy oligarch. Why daddy oligarch? Why not? Because of everything we talked about how he gets to just like be the guy laughing
It all comes down from him. Like, at the end of the day, just in terms of power positions, you're like, they all shut up and do what he says.
Yeah, no, you're right. It absolutely has to be him. Even though I didn't even think about that. I think that's such a smart observation you made, that like positioning mommy oligarch as like the bad guy, as like the one who's actually like calling the shots, telling everyone what to do, being an asshole the whole time, was an intentional choice that I did not pick up on.
And you're right, she probably was not born into it.
No, or you know, maybe comes from like another wealthy family, whatever, got to marry in, but understands.
A Melania, Ivanka, yeah.
Okay, daddy oligarch. All right, and better supporting character goes to the supporting character that this movie should actually be about.
Ooh, there's so many.
I could really do the whole movie of like Toros and Garnick and Igor, like having to deal with other shits for this family.
Totally.
They just were so. It was so fun. The moment when Garnick throws up in the car because he's on pills and is all fucked up.
Oh my God.
And they're just like sitting there. They're just sitting there in the stink, and Toros is just like, fuck, I'm so fucked. You think you're fucked? I'm fucked. I am so much more fucked. You don't even know how fucked I am. All that stuff was so fun.
That's so good. I want more Anora. I want, like, I know it's her title film, but I want one where it's, I want a different take. I wanted to see more of her home life, more Coney Island, like on the train, and more of the women from the club, but like more of those moments, like, who are they when they're not at work?
That's fair.
Well, I agree with you. I think that's one of the more comprehensive. I was looking for conversations. There's a lot of people on TikTok.
I think people will look back on this podcast as
the definitive,
as the preeminent Anora conversation of our time. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you for being one of our paid supporters
and shout
to our
out
Patreon.
To John, our editor, who will be editing the most comprehensive Anora.
Big shout out to John. You know, actually realizing we didn't announce John on a public episode.
John, and we'll have to maybe have John come give a little shout out, put a little voice to a to an edit.
So maybe you will already have known about John, but if not, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Part of the MVC team now. And thank you all again, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And a reminder that we donate our ad space. So if you're part of a leftist or progressive organization and you'd like to run an ad on the show, you can email us at moviesvscapitalism@gmail.com.
That's right. For next week, we will be watching the 2022 biopic, or biopic, however you like.
Biopic.
Okay, biopic.
I'm putting my foot down.
About the founder of Amazon, Bezos, the beginning.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.